This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome once again from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm Evan Jansen. This show is always live and it's broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, we also stream live on YouTube with the whole show always available on demand on our YouTube channel. I'm an African, not because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. Happy Africa Day and a special welcome to all our new viewers around the continent. Today, we look at South Africa's relationship with the continent. We'll also focus on children's rights in Africa and ask the question, should we be doing more? After the break, we'll talk to Vusi Mona at Sanral on the latest uproar around e-tolls and the billing system that's under the spotlight. We'll also close the show today with the Black Sash that celebrated 60 years of activism this weekend past. But first, let's get the day's news from Anita Moore.
Good morning, I'm Anindo Mal. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Lawyers representing the injured and arrested Marikana Myers want the Marikana Commission report released by the end of May. This after being instructed to seek a court order forcing President Jacob Zuma to release the Marikana report. The president said last week he was mulling over the report and suggested it would be released soon. Lawyers of the miners say the presidency did not heed a request to release the report yesterday. Another bid for release on medical parole by Clive Derby-Lewis has been set down as a special motion in court. The motion is expected to be heard by Judge Shelby Bakwa in the High Court in Pretoria today. Derby-Lewis, who was convicted for the murder of South African Communist Party leader Chris Hani 22 years ago, has been in hospital since last year, where he is being treated for cancer. He was denied medical parole earlier this year. COSATU's Central Executive Committee is expected to hold its first meeting since the expulsion of former General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi in Johannesburg today. The meeting comes at a time when the Labour Federation is facing a number of challenges from affiliates who have indicated tacit support for expelled union NUMSA. Health Minister Aaron Motsoaledi has denied reports of a shortage of essential medicines in the country. Motsoaledi held a media conference after reports emerged that the country's health facilities were running out of ARVs and various antibiotics.
We can assure you that at no stage did the country ever have a shortage of fixed dose combinations of ARVs.
Ethiopia's ruling party is expecting a landslide election victory. Parliamentary elections in Ethiopia came to a close late yesterday as opponents complained their supporters were harassed. Provisional results are expected to emerge in a few days, while the final tally is due to be declared next month in the nation of 96 million people and 37 million registered voters. And President Jacob Zuma has called for unity among Africans as the continent celebrates Africa Day today. The day commemorates the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, which turns 52 years. President Zuma says celebration should mark the beginning of promoting African union and African identity. The president was delivering his address at Africa Day celebrations in Mamelodi, east of Pretoria.
I think today, every school, church or community, choirs and individuals must practice the African Union anthem.
Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Janine. Now, we were going to start with Africa Day. It is African Day celebrations today all around the continent. But unfortunately, our expert is running a little bit late. Johannesburg traffic once again causing the problem. So we'll deal with one of the other issues at hand. From August this year, motorists here in Gauteng will have a 6-month grace period to repay debt incurred by the use of the e-toll system. The accumulated debt does not come at the expense of road users who have been paying, but will a 60% discount encourage all road users to finally cough up the money. To tell us, well, about some of the new changes, we are joined by the spokesperson of the South African National Roads Agency, Mr. Vusi Mona. He's live out of our Pretoria studios this morning. A very good morning, Mr. Mona. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you and good morning to the viewers at home.
Mr. Mona, just clear up for us. SANRAL now needs 3 months to change the system. Once the system's been changed, motorists then have 6 months to settle their debt. Just clear that up for us, please.
Well, the new changes that were announced by the Deputy President last week will take anything between 2 months to 18 months to fully implement. You would appreciate that there are issues of system changes. We have spoken about an integration of our system with the South African Post Office and the licensing authorities here in Gauteng. Now, that is going to take a bit of time. We've taken a decision as government and as SANRAL not to wait until everything is ready, but to implement those aspects of the new dispensation that will be ready as time goes by. But we have given ourselves, all in all, 18 months for this to be fully implemented. We reckon that the maximum caps and the lower tariff should come on stream between 2 to 3 months. We should be ready with that. And the discounted regime that was announced, the 60% that you've alluded to, it should be implementable within the next 3 to 4 months. And the rest, integrating our system with the South African Post Office, integrating our system with the licensing authority, implementing what we call the infrequent user regime that gives those who pass under the gantries less than 30 times a year 100% discount. That will take us anything from 6 to 18 months. So the timeline is 2 to 18 months, and as each and every aspect of the new deal becomes ready, we will implement and we will make announcements to the road users.
Now, Mr. Mona, what about the incorrect billing scenarios that have been playing out? I'll sketch you a picture. I'm one of those that have been billed incorrectly. I live in Northcliffe. I work in Auckland Park. But I got 2 bills for my 2 cars for 25 and 22,000 Rand last week, which kind of deflates me a little bit because I don't use the, I don't have to use the highways. I live 5 minutes from my workplace, but I got these exorbitant bills, and it's really shocked me a little bit. How are you going to deal with that kind of thing, and how do you restore faith?
Well, last week the Deputy President did announce that we are looking at getting the details of motor vehicle owners updated by October this year. In fact, our shareholder Department of Transport, has already put in a law that says that by October this year, we must all FICA our vehicles to basically address the problem that we are alluding to. As SANRAL, we rely on people registering with us, giving us their correct details so that we can, and their preferred mode of communication, so that we can bill them correctly and where they are. But we also rely on the data that sits on Inatus. And we know that that data is corrupted, is outdated. And to clean up the data, by October this year, we all have to, as motor vehicle owners, we all have to register and update our information on Inatus. That will address the problem of wrong bills going to road users.
In the short term, though, sir, what would your advice be to someone like me and other members of the public who've been billed incorrectly?
Well, if you have been billed incorrectly, we do have a dispute resolution mechanism that we've put in place, and you can contact us as SANRAL. You'll fill the necessary forms, and we will look into it. If you are clearly not on the wrong, we will be prepared, to accede to your demands or your requests. So you know, if we hit you with a bill and you are firmly of the view that it is not your bill, there is recourse, there is a mechanism that you can use. You contact us, we'll help you fill the necessary forms, and we'll resolve that matter.
Finally, the plea to motorists, and then if you can maybe remind people of the new changes.
Well, our plea to road users is that they must come on board. We think that government has listened. Government has done its part. The Premier of Gauteng conducted a thorough consultative process when he appointed the e-toll advisory panel. So government has come to the party. It has listened to the concerns of road users, and it has given a number of concessions, and I'll quickly go through them. One is that all road users now will be entitled to the lower e-tag tariff. So you don't need to have an e-tag, you don't need to have registered with SANRAL in order to enjoy the lower tariff. That's one major concession. The second one, of course, is the 60% discount on accumulated areas as from the beginning of as from the 3rd of December when we started with the project. There may be people who have not paid, or there may be people who we have since stopped paying because they were not sure about the future of the project. Government has granted a 60% discount, and you will have an opportunity to pay that over a 6-month period. The other major concession is that in the past, the maximum that was payable by those who were registered and compliant was 450 rands for light motor vehicles. Government has slashed that by 50%. These are some of the new changes that government has put in place.
I thank you for joining us and clearing that up. And it's nice to know there's recourse for someone like me. I thank you for joining us again. Mr. Vusimona, that's the spokesperson of SANRAL. Yeah, in Gauteng. We're talking e-tolls. It's a lot of unhappiness around billing issues, scenarios, but we're all going to have to come to terms with it together. If we want to ride the best roads in the world, we have to pay. It's as simple as that. Let's take a look at, well, what's happening on our social media page around this. I can tell you that these are pictures that are coming in from the US, the United States. It says there, floods, of course, in Texas. Jody Brown says Lake Lavin today. No fishing, barbecuing, or driving through this park. That used to be a park. Floods in Texas. Ana Garcia says, be safe. Wichita Falls, 2015, talking about the Texas flood. And there you have cleanup operations and then small little towns dealing with massive flooding in Texas. Don't drown, turn around. Bridge near San Marcos at the Highway 165. That one from Nancy in Texas. Yes, the hard hit by floods. There you can see the scale of it, really. That is San Marcos River, Texas flood. That picture from Frankie P. He says, as you can see, the whole town is pretty much flooded in Texas. Coming to terms with heavy flooding there. Let's take a look at a picture from the day. Statesman photo captioned, at least 1,000 Hayes County residents displaced by flood waters. Photos of the hashtag Texas flood damage. There you can see trees just ripped out. Extensive damage throughout southern United States. Let's take a look at the front pages from around the globe now. We start with the International New York Times. The morning after Ireland learned it had become the first nation to approve same-sex marriage by popular vote, Dermot Martin, the Archbishop of Dublin, looked at the future of the Roman Catholic Church, saying that the Church needs to take a reality check and that it's very clear there's a growing gap between Irish young people and the Church. Across the pond, the Miami Herald reports that thousands gathered at the South Florida Cemetery to bring Memorial Day bouquets. The cemetery serves as a final resting place for thousands of veterans that served in wars as far back as World War II. And finally, in Israel, the Jerusalem Post, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry for blocking an Egyptian-led drive on a possible Middle East nuclear arms ban at a United Nations conference. Some of the stories in the international headlines. Let's take a quick look at what's happening around the country here in South Africa. We start in the capital, Pretoria, where Clive Derby Lewis's bid for medical parole is expected to be heard in the High Court. Derby Lewis, who is currently serving a life sentence for the 1993 killing of South African Communist Party leader Chris Hani, has been repeatedly denied parole. Then, in the Polokwane Magistrates Court, the bail hearing of businessman Ramiz Patel, who's accused of killing his wife Fatima, is expected to continue there. Then in KwaZulu-Natal, a former Emergency Medical Aid Service staff member will appear in the Durban Regional Court in connection with incitement, violence, arson and the intimidation of workers. This is Newsroom. We'll be back with you after a short little break.
Your World makes it its business every evening to round up the leading local stories and international news to keep you informed all the time.
Make a date with Your World every evening for all the news headlines around the world to keep you abreast with knowledge.
Catch Your World for headlines across the world every Monday to Friday from 9 p.m, then Saturday and Sunday from 7 p.m.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom. It's Africa Day, an annual commemoration on May 25 of the 1963 founding of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. On this day, African leaders of 30 of the 32 independent African states signed a founding charter in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. In 1991, the OAU established the African Economic Community, and in 2002, the OAU established its own successor, the African Union. The day also offers South Africans an opportunity to reconnect and recommit themselves in support of all government interventions to develop a better Africa and a better world. Today also marks 21 years since South Africa was integrated into the Organization of African Unity, followed by the African Union and then the international community. Now, political analyst Dr. Somadoda Fikeni joins us from Pretoria to discuss the challenges confronting the continent. Good morning, Dr. Fikeni. It's very nice to have you with us again.
Good morning to you and good morning to your viewers.
Today is a celebratory day around Africa. Do you feel we have a lot to celebrate?
We do have a lot to celebrate the journey, but not to celebrate the destination, because that is still a long way, which is quite precarious. If you look at all other continental unities, whether it's the EU, you find that they still face challenges more than 50 years later, and the African Union is no exception to this particular rule. But what we can say is that if we look where we were in the 70s and 80s, military rule, dictatorships, personal rule, and we look at a number of countries which have embraced democratic systems, it's quite impressive. If we look at Africa, that was written off as a continent that is of no significance in the world in economic terms in the 1990s. Today, 11 of the fastest growing economies, albeit from a low base, are in the continent.
Yeah.
Do we still have problems? Yes, we do have plenty of problems that Africa has to be facing.
Dr. Fikeni, what about South Africa's relationship with the rest of Africa in light of recent goings-on? How do we look? Where are we?
Well, I do think that South Africa has done well in terms of its role, in terms of peacekeeping in the continent, in terms of the investments in the continent, and even assuming leadership positions within the continental framework. But what we have not done well in is the conscientization of the general population about the links that tie us to the rest of the African continent. Because during the colonial years, during the apartheid years, the education system often emphasized South Africa being physically in the continent, but in terms of its culture, history, looking up north in Europe or in the West. So that is where I think there is still a lot of work that we should be emphasizing on, and also introducing more of the education about the continent itself, about the African Union.
Corruption and a lust for power always seem to derail all the good work that we do on the African continent. Is this a challenge that you think we'll be overcoming in the short and medium term?
Not in the short term, but with good, solid, courageous leadership, with visionary leadership, in the long run, you would have this challenge overcome. Remember that not any continent has escaped the problem of corruption. It's a matter of degrees. And in Africa, because of its fragile and weak economies, when such corruption takes place, it almost break the backbone of any small economy. And as such, also because Africa mainly depends on extractive economy where the mineral resources are exported, you find that corruption often involves multinationals who are chasing after these mineral resources. The global system also has to take its part in monitoring some of these instances.
Dr. Fikeni, how do you view organizations like the Pan-African Parliament we've just seen concluding their work almost here in Gauteng?
Well, I do not think they have been given enough space to have a meaningful impact because they deliberate, they can advise, but they do not make any policies like, let's say, the European Parliament or any other parliament in a confederal arrangement. They ought to be given some spaces where they can make common standards, common laws which are binding, rather than deferring those into the African Union Commission or the African Union heads of states to decide on. Once that is done, and also have direct elections of people who would be elected into this parliament as a proportion of people from different countries, it would have the clout, the legitimacy, as well as the teeth to bite.
Finally, Dr. Fikeni, in the next decade, what do you think is the key challenge that Africa has to overcome in order to head into this prosperous African century?
Well, I do think that the main challenge now is integrating economy in Africa and creating infrastructure that doesn't take resources from pit to port, but that circulate and beneficiate and even manufacture those within the continent. The second one, the problem is political, especially the international conflicts which are actually raging, especially in those areas where you do have resources. If that political instability in places like the DRC, Burundi, South Sudan, Central African Republic, and the northern Nigerian region where you have Boko Haram or Somali, if you were to make those states solid enough and those regions have the political stability and security, then democracy could proliferate.
Dr. Fikeni, thank you very much for joining us. It's always wonderful to have your insights on the show. That is Dr. Somadeda Fikeni coming to you live from our studios in Pretoria. He, of course, is one of the foremost political analysts here in South Africa. Let's just take a look now. What you're talking about with regards to Africa Day on social media. Now, Africa Day aims to celebrate African unity, says African Facts. Yes, that is at the heart of it. We are Africa. I am Africa, not because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. Africa, you are the most beautiful continent on earth, says Eric. Hashtag Africa Day. Honeypot Guesthouse says, wonderful Africa Day, everyone. Calm, warm weather bounds our wonderful space. Our New Zealand guests are thrilled with South Africa. Most of the world's thrilled with us. Sometimes I wonder if we are thrilled with ourselves. DJ Sphere annual party says it has thawed in the warmth of our sunshine and melted in the heat of the midday sun. That quote from Thabo Mbeki, Africa Day. Rural rock star Siemma says This Africa Day, may our men and sons realize that period pains are anything but stomach pains or a curse, but our normal and reality. Endometriosis, I think. A little bit lost, a little bit over my head there, unfortunately. Now let's take a look at our tweet of the day. Today, this one comes from Vengai Mukonoweshuru saying, Happy Africa Day, Africa. May this day help us rejuvenate the Pan-African spirit so that we can move forward as one united family. Hashtag Africa Day. Now, as we celebrate Africa Day and continue to do so, it's also important to discuss the issues that the continent is facing every day. Across Africa, human rights violations are still rife, especially those of children. Last week, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of a Child reviewed Eritrea and Ghana's children's rights, as well as applauded South Sudan for ratifying the Convention on the Rights of the Child, thus becoming the 195th state to do so. The committee highlighted a number of issues, including the discrimination of vulnerable children, especially those with disabilities, the spread of disease, poverty, and the lack of basic needs. Now, joining us from London is Human Rights Watch Senior Researcher for Southern Africa, Dewa Mabenga. Very good morning to you. I thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Live, coming to us on Skype. Just tell us quickly, what does it actually mean for a country to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child?
Well, what it means is that the country has expressed its intention to be legally bound by the provisions of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And it means that it is committed to taking the necessary steps to ensure that the rights of children in that country are protected. So this includes the right to education for all children, including those with disabilities. This includes eliminating issues of recruitment of child soldiers, for example. This also includes eliminating child marriages and promoting the right to education for the girl child.
What do you believe are some of the most concerning rights of children that are being violated across the continent right now?
Three key ones relate to the right to education, especially for the girl child across Africa. And this is related to the failure in some territories and countries to eliminate child marriage, where the girl child is given into marriage before 18. But also, most importantly, for the boy child is the recruitment of child soldiers being sent into war zones and conflict zones. This is a significant and serious violation of the right to the protection of the child across Africa, particularly in Sudan, Eritrea, and other parts like Chad.
In conflict zones, can we do more to protect children that are refugees and that are at risk in countries in conflict?
Absolutely. And the first step is to ensure that both sides in the conflict, or any side that is in the conflict, does not recruit child soldiers, and that while children are in camps as refugees, or as migrants, or as internally displaced, their rights are protected. They have access to education, access to health and to clean water, and to a future that is bright, which is something that we are celebrating on Africa Day.
Now, it is Africa Day, and it's a celebratory mood around the continent. Tell us, what should Africa Day mean to the children of Africa?
I think first and foremost, it is a celebration of our identity as a people, which must also be about our common values as Africans. And at the core of these values is the value of Ubuntu. So it is about sharing our common history and our common destiny. And it is about coming together as a people and developing together, so that we are not developing in isolation, but we know that I cannot be enjoying my rights alone when others are not enjoying their rights. So the enjoyment of rights should be universal, should be for everyone and for all children everywhere and anywhere.
Finally, the African Union and other bodies around the continent, what do you as human rights want them to do differently going forward to deal with African children at risk?
Well, they've done well in having a number of laws on paper or legal obligations on paper. What now is needed is to ensure that there is implementation of those principles and values, and that there is enforcement of those values, which means there is need for action to deal with perpetrators, those that violate the rights of children. There is need to raise the cost of violating human rights, particularly those of children across Africa. We have not seen enough of that so far. A commitment, yes, movement, and also different countries under the African Union should have national action plans that have resources to them to fulfill the different rights that we are talking about. For example, the right to education, it needs resources. It needs commitment in terms of finance to make sure that it becomes a reality. And also the forgotten children, especially those that are with disabilities, they need to be protected and to ensure that they are also treated equally, because all children have equal rights, notwithstanding their disability.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us today, live from London via Skype. That is Human Rights Watch senior researcher for Southern Africa, Dewa Mabinga, joined us live from London. They're giving us a look at children's rights, which is one of those key rights that we really have to look after here on the continent as we celebrate Africa Day. Now, let's take a look at what's happening on our Newsroom Facebook page today. Now, police remain adamant that anti-gang operations in Manenberg on the Cape Flats are yielding results. This comes after a 25-year-old man was shot dead and 3 others were wounded in renewed gang violence at the weekend. Then, speaking at the Africa Day celebrations in Mamelodi, that's at the University of Pretoria campus, President Jacob Zuma reminded the country that foreign nationals have fought for the liberation of all of us here in South Africa. And a Cleveland police officer was found not guilty on Saturday in the shooting deaths of an unarmed black man and a woman after a high-speed car chase in 2012, one in a series of cases that have raised questions over police conduct and race relations in the United States. Now, before we go to break, yesterday, the Sunday newspaper reported that comedian Trevor Noah's cousin, SABC Happiness Khoza, had been killed, and that the KwaZulu-Natal police were still investigating the murder, although no arrests had been made. Well, Khoza had allegedly travelled from her hometown of Msinga to Greytown to prepare for the ceremony of a postgraduate certificate in education, but then went missing. Now, soon after the search, her burnt body was found in a sugarcane field by farm workers. But Trevor Noah had this to say on Twitter in response to the reports. He has called it bad journalism. Thanks to some crafty journalism, my family and I have spent the whole day trying to figure out if one of us died. Hashtag awkward. I can understand, Trevor. At times I'm also concerned with the standard of reporting. That kind of thing passed in one of our premier Sunday newspapers. Can you imagine that? This is Newsroom. We'll be back with you shortly. SABC News seeks to be the biggest, the most extensive and diverse news organization on the continent. Our mission is to provide accurate and credible news and current affairs programming throughout the day. We are committed to covering every part of the continent. We reflect the world to Africa and Africa to the world. SABC News, Africa's news leader. Now available throughout the continent.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Lawyers representing the injured and arrested Marikana miners want the Marikana Commission report released by the end of May. This after being instructed to seek a court order forcing President Jacob Zuma to release the Marikana report. The president said last week he was mulling over the report and suggested it would not be released soon. Lawyers of the miners say the presidency did not heed a request to release the report yesterday. Another bid for release on medical parole by Clive Derby Lewis has been set down as a special motion in court. The motion is expected to be heard by Judge Shelby Bakra in the High Court in Pretoria today. Derby Lewis, who was convicted for the murder of South African Communist Party leader Chris Hani 22 years ago, has been in hospital since last year, where he is being treated for cancer. And COSATU's Central Executive Committee is expected to hold its first meeting since the expulsion of former General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi in Johannesburg today. The meeting comes at a time when the Labour Federation is facing a number of challenges from affiliates who have indicated tacit support for expelled union NUMSA. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Yeben, back to you.
Thank you very much, Janine. This weekend past, the Black Sash, together with the South African History Archive and Constitution Hill, celebrated its 60th anniversary. Black Sash developed into a powerful force for protest and change in 1955 after 6 middle-class white women were outraged by the then government's attempts at removing coloured citizens from the voters' roll. Known for their anti-apartheid activism and silent street protests against unjust laws, the Black Sash continues working alongside numerous NGOs and community activists today. Now, the interview Batusi was recorded on Friday. We were joined in Cape Town by Black Sash's National Director Lynette Mart and then trustee Dr. Mary Burton. Now, joining us from Cape Town to tell us more is Black Sash's National Director Lynette Mart and trustee Dr. Mary Burton. A very good morning, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you.
Lynette, if I can start with you, I want to talk about activism in general a little bit in South Africa before we go into your celebrations. Tell us about the state of activism in South Africa. Are we losing the activist's edge that we had, say, 25 years ago?
Well, I think that activism, there's a new form of activism. In the past, we used to have one single apartheid system to fight. Today, it's the battles fought on many different fronts, particularly in the socio-economic sphere. We have seen, for example, the Treatment Action Campaign and their activism around antiretrovirals and the broader AIDS battle. Our own struggle today within the Black Sash and with our partners is around the debit deductions from social grants, the bank account of grant beneficiaries. And the activism here is to ensure that the rights of people to social security and social protection is not diluted in a way. So I think that the question of activism just takes on a very, very different form. Some might be street protests, some might be through the media, some might actually be in the chambers of government, fighting and sorting out compromise positions.
Dr. Burton, if I can come to you.
To add to that.
I want you to add to that, but I also want to talk about 21 years after democracy now and whether we have that kind of active citizenry that we will need to really build the dream.
I think that what we are seeing again now, after perhaps some years when there was a tendency not to mobilize around the many issues that we still need to deal with, what we are seeing now is voices coming from local communities. And that was a very important part of what led eventually to our political transformation. And once again, we are seeing people use their voices, make their protests on issues that matter to their daily lives. And that's a very important source of political activism, as people seek to change the conditions that they live under.
Lynette, tell us about 60 years on, the celebrations, and also then the highlights that stand out for you over the last 6 decades.
Well, it is a wonderful celebration. We used to say, even in the bad old days, that perhaps the greatest victory was simply survival under the years of apartheid. And so it is a time of celebration, and a time of celebration too in the transformation that we have achieved, because after 1994 we wondered whether there was still a role for us, and made major changes in the way that we work, transforming ourselves from a volunteer activist members organization to a much more tightly run, professionally run structure. And that is what Lynette heads up today.
Lynette, tell us...
So we're celebrating the past, but we're also looking to the future.
Absolutely. Lynette, tell us about the new biography of Sheena Duncan that's also being launched, that forms part of this. Tell us a little bit about her life and the impact that she had.
I think I'm going to ask Mary to do that particular question. I will come back and add at the end.
The book is a wonderful book. It takes the life of Sheena Duncan, who was such an important leader in the Black Sash, and it looks at the roles that she played in not only in the Black Sash, but within the faith movement, within struggles to change the laws, struggles to work for peace, to end conscription, to end the death penalty, and even during our times of transition and in the modern time of South Africa, to try and demilitarize and de-arm our society, to make it less violent and more peaceful. So she made a huge contribution, and it's wonderful to have this book that tells her story. Anna Marie Hendricks has done a marvelous job of depicting her as a woman, as a mother and wife and daughter, as well as a political activist. But it also tells the story of a long period of our history. And in fact, we have 2 books that are both being launched at this celebration. And the other one is about the Natal Midlands.
Oh, that's fantastic. If I can just go to Lynette and talk about tomorrow's celebration. If you can tell us a little bit about the panel discussions that are going to happen there. I understand you've got leaders past and present that will be there. What's your expectation about that? What will be the points of discussion?
Well, I think it's quite an important event, because it's partly stock taking. It's partly saying, this is the journey that we have taken as an organization. The struggles around land, the struggles around influx control, the urban struggles for people's rights to be in the city. But to take it to another level and saying, what are the challenges today? What are the things that we need to take on board, amplify, change, transform, and improve the way in which we engage in struggle. So I think it's a very important event. In fact, we had one on the 19th, which is our actual birthday. And in that conversation, we also spoke about the book, or in fact, and reference to the second book, but stock take of where we are currently and how we need to move forward.
Well, Lynette, thank you very much for joining us. That's the National Director, Lynette Mart, and then Trustee, Dr. Mary Burton. We're talking about the Black Sash. 60 years of activism. We should all become more active in, in our societies, in our communities, in our country, in our politics and our policies. That is what activism is about. We need to be more active. Yes, be more active, take part in your communities, be an agent of change. That's what South Africa needs in the 21st century. That's what Africa needs. Today, we are activists for Africa. And let's just recap on the news of the day across the continent. Africa Day celebrations are being held.
In Cape Town, the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania marched in the street of Nyanga to spread anti-xenophobic messages.
We need to go back now and support our people because we have not yet attained the freedom.
In Khayelitsha, the ANC in the Western Cape celebrated with a multicultural event. The party says the day provides an opportunity for South Africa to consider ways of strengthening its relation with countries in the SADC region.
More than 1 billion people from Africa. We had challenges over the last couple of years, and part of those challenges is the stabilization in African countries.
Calls were also made for Africa's mineral wealth to be shared amongst its people.
It's long overdue that Africa has to take a center stage in the world.
In the Northwest, religious leaders took a stand against racial intolerance. Heeding a call made by President Jacob Zuma that churches and civil society should stand up against xenophobia. The clergy marched through the streets of Mabato in solidarity with fellow Africans. And in Kimberley, Africa Day was celebrated by spreading a message of unity through sports. Various African countries were represented. Authorities have committed themselves to supporting immigrants. Meanwhile, those who attended a prayer service in Johannesburg also called for unity. More celebrations are planned throughout the country on Monday.
Now, Health Minister Aaron Motsoaledi has denied reports of a shortage of essential medicines here in the country. Motsoaledi held a media conference after reports emerged that the country's health facilities were running out of ARVs and various antibiotics.
The Health Minister assuring South Africans that they will receive medication required.
We even implemented the practice of a national buffer stock, whereby 10% of all the fixed dose combinations provided are strategically stockpiled with a service provider in a warehouse. We do this stockpiling in a particular warehouse kept by a private service provider in case there are unforeseen emergencies. And these unforeseen emergencies may arise locally, nationally, and even internationally. We also made sure that we have different suppliers of the FCDs for strategic reason. So we can assure you that at no stage did the country ever have a shortage of fixed dose combinations of ARVs.
The minister also maintains there are no payment issues with suppliers.
At no stage did any company report that the shortages were related to non-payment of ARVs, despite us asking them directly in order to save time and cut down on problems.
Motsoaledi also said changing suppliers delayed medicine reaching distribution points. This was because it took up to 3 months for a new company to start delivering drugs after it had been contracted. Stefania Komani, SABC News, Pretoria.
Let's take a look at your tweets. What are you talking about? Gay marriage in Ireland? Well, first ones to pass it. Amy says, glad Ireland voted to approve marriage equality. Great news, not just for the LGBT friends, but for everyone who believes in equal rights. Grace Wilson says, so proud of Ireland, the country I studied abroad in and loved dearly, for being the first country to legalize same-sex marriage. And then Adrian Ashley says, proud to be Irish. Ireland passes gay marriage by a 65% popular vote. The country has spoken and the world should listen. Karina says, Ireland goes down in history as the first ever country to legalize same-sex marriage by popular public vote. Hashtag proud. And Robert Doyle says, Ireland referendum paving the path for the rest of the world. Their traditionally conservative culture gives me hope for change, says Robert Doyle, of course, legalizing same-sex marriage in Ireland. Now, today we're going to close with the African Union anthem. President Jacob Zuma has stressed that incorporating this anthem in South African schools and churches will help build a united Africa. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at the time, but the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning. Happy Africa Day.